to the Verge Report. Today is Monday, March 20th, 2023. A newly released Social Science Research Network study report suggests that 186 banks in the United States could be in trouble and could have the same fate as Silicon Valley Bank. The researchers put together a hypothetical scenario in which each bank experienced a run and concluded that the FDIC would run out of money. The study was published not long after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, the worst American financial institution failure since 2008. Their study suggested that these 186 banks are at a potential risk of a run, absent other government intervention or recapitalization. Quote, even if only half of uninsured depositors decide to withdraw, roughly 186 banks are at risk of harm to insured depositors, with potentially $300 billion of insured deposits at risk, the study abstract reads. If uninsured deposit withdrawals cause even small fire sales, substantially more banks are at risk. Just a reminder, a fire sale is when goods or assets are sold at a very low price, typically when the seller is facing bankruptcy. The problem these banks face is that the majority of these banks' assets are in government bonds and mortgage-backed securities, which were and are currently adversely affected by the Federal Reserve's recent interest rate hikes. Many of Silicon Valley's bank assets were long-term government bonds. Despite being a sound long-term investment, they were not worth as much as when the SVB originally bought them and wound up having to sell those bonds at a staggering $1.8 billion loss to meet customer withdrawals. When SVB disclosed that loss, their depositors were rattled, panicked, and withdrew their money. Quote, overall, these calculations suggest that recent decline in bank asset values very significantly increased the fragility of the U.S. banking system to uninsured depositor runs, the study abstract concludes. Meanwhile, while the banking crisis accelerates, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen admitted to the U.S. Senate Thursday that the government is choosing winners and losers in the manipulated world of bailouts. And who do you think is holding the short end of the stick? You guessed it, the smaller community banks. Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford asked Yellen a very simple question. Will the deposits in every community bank in Oklahoma, regardless of their size, be fully insured now? Are they fully covered, every bank, every community bank in Oklahoma, regardless of the size of the deposit? And will they get the same treatment as SVP got or Signature Bank just got? And how did Yellen respond? Quote, a bank only gets that treatment if a majority of the FDIC board, a supermajority of the Fed board, and I, in consultation with the president, determined that the failure to protect uninsured depositors would create systemic risk and significant economic and financial consequences. In other words, if the FDIC likes your bank, the depositors are insured. If not, the depositors are not insured over $250K. Which means what? It means that people will withdraw their money from community banks and hand those deposits over to a handful of giant banks that not only own nearly all of the banking sector, but will refuse to do business with you if you hold certain conservative political opinions that they find offensive. Senator Lankford understands what these corrupt to the core organizations are up to and followed up with this. So what's your plan to keep large depositors from moving their funds out of community banks into big banks? We have seen the mergers of banks over the past decade, and I'm concerned you're about to accelerate that by encouraging anyone who has a large deposit in a community bank to say, we're not going to make you whole, but if you go to one of our preferred banks, we will make you whole at that point. Yellen responded and stated, look, I mean, that certainly is not something we're trying to encourage. Lankford responded with the obvious, but that is what's happening right now. Yellen's idiot act continued. That is happening because depositors are concerned about the bank failures that have happened and whether other banks could also fail. Lankford again tried to get her to answer the only question that mattered. No, it's happening because you're fully insured no matter what the amount is in your bank. You're not fully insured if you are in a community bank. Listen to this short exchange.
Don't have time. I need to be able to drill in on a couple of things. Let me start with some of the banking issues we're dealing with on it. Will the deposits in every community bank in Oklahoma, regardless of their size, be fully insured now? Are they fully recovered? Every bank, every community bank in Oklahoma, regardless of the size of the deposit, will they get the same treatment that SVB just got or Signature Bank just got?
A bank only gets that treatment if a majority of the FDIC board, a supermajority of the Fed board, and I, in consultation with the president, determine that the failure to protect uninsured depositors would create systemic risk and significant economic and financial consequences.
So what is your
And we
plan?
made that determination.
Right. So what
these
is
two
your
banks.
plan to keep large depositors from moving their funds out of community banks into the big banks? We have seen the mergers of banks over the past decade. I'm concerned you're about to accelerate that by encouraging anyone who has a large deposit in a community bank to say, we're not going to make you whole, but if you go to one of our preferred banks, we will make you whole at that point.
Look, I mean, that's certainly not something that we're encouraging.
That is happening right now.
That is happening because depositors are concerned about the bank failures that have happened and whether or not other banks could also
No,
fail.
it's happening
And
because you're
it's-
fully insured no matter what the amount is if you're in a big bank. You're not fully insured if you're in a community bank.
Well, you're not fully insured. And
You
the big-
were at Signature, and
the
it
big-
just barely met that threshold. You were at Signature.
Well, we felt that there was a serious risk of contagion that could have brought down and triggered runs on many banks. And that's something, given that our judgment is that the banking system overall is safe and sound, depositors should have confidence in the system, and we took these actions.
So there's a
to
special
discourage
assessment that's been done
contagion.
on community banks in my state and all banks across the country. Was there any discussion that that special assessment would only apply to the larger banks, or was it always assumed the special assessment would cover every bank, including rural banks in my state?
I think, I'm not certain what the rules are around that. That's for the FDIC to determine.
It has been reported publicly that SVB had a large number of Chinese investors that are there, including some that were companies directly connected to the Chinese Communist Party. Will those individuals, companies, entities, and investors that are Chinese investors be made whole based on assessments in my banks in Oklahoma? So what I'm asking is, will my banks in Oklahoma pay a special assessment to be able to make Chinese investors whole from Silicon Valley Bank?
Uninsured investors will be made whole in that bank, and I suppose that could include foreign depositors, but I don't believe there's any legal basis to discriminate among uninsured.
I get it, but I'm just saying that my community banks are going to pay this additional fee. It is always fascinating to me as well, the conversation that taxpayers are being made whole in this, that taxpayers are not going to have any kind of consequence on this. I'm sure my bankers are going to be very excited to know they no longer pay taxes, and their banks no longer pay taxes. Credit unions don't pay taxes, banks do, and so they're definitely taxpayers as well, and all banks make their revenue off of rates and fees and such to their account holders, which means every Oklahoman will pay higher fees in their community bank.
We're just going to have to move on.
If we have a collapse of the banking system and its economic consequences, that will have very severe effects on banks in Oklahoma that will also be threatened.
I'm just worried about the long-term
We are going to have to
consequences
move
on our
on,
banks as well.
or we're not going to get all senators in. Senator.
I hope you can see what's happening here. By informing the public that their money is only safe in those big banks that the Democratic Party favors, everyone will deposit their money in the big banks and effectively bankrupt community banks or force them to give up their assets to the big banks. This is just step one. Step two gets much worse. Once the big banks control all the money, they will also force their depositors to comply with all environmental, social, and governance rules. They will dictate to you what kind of business you can run, what you can and cannot say on social media, and what opinions you can hold. How would you like to live in a world where a gun store has no place to bank or run a credit card payment, or where a mall owner cannot rent to a gun store? How would you like to live in a world where your accounts are closed if you tweet a biological fact like trans women are actually men? You might not want to live in that world, but that is the world the Democratic Party seeks. They are in the process of deliberately undermining trust in community banks. They are trying to centralize power, and all at your expense. They don't care about you one bit. This is a centralized move to consolidate the banking sector into their approved banking partners. Anyone who doesn't see what is happening will soon lose a major part of their assets either through bank failures, currency debasement, or the collapse of all bubble assets like stocks, property, bonds by 75 or 100%. This is not financial advice, but I can only tell you what I would be doing, and that is to get food, get water, get some cash for emergencies in case the banks continue to have runs, and if possible, get out of debt. Certainly, I would not be moving my money into one of these mega banks. Dark days have indeed arrived, and the markets are in trouble. Even with the Fed being the buyer of last resort, the markets are in deep trouble. They can no longer hide the contagion with their fake numbers and spin. Get ready, again, not financial advice, but if you can get some gold or silver to hedge against this incoming crash, it would be smart. These commodities cannot be suppressed forever. There are many places to buy them. SD Bullion, Money Metals, JM Bullion are just a few reputable organizations to purchase from, but you can use whoever you want. The point is to prepare for the eventual and massive financial crisis that's incoming. Thank you for listening. If you can, please support this channel by buying me a coffee or by visiting my affiliate links. Your help is very much appreciated. Until next time, this is the Rudick Report.